What would you do if your kindness nearly cost you everything, but ended up changing your life forever? Let me tell you about Jack Williams, a man most people would pass by without noticing. He wasn't famous, didn't have much money, and his name never made the headlines. But what he did one quiet afternoon on a dusty roadside changed not just his future, but the lives of many. Jack was a farmer, the kind who still believed in hard work and quiet prayers. His farm wasn't much anymore. Years of drought had stolen the best parts of his land, and with his wife Sarah gone, the old farmhouse felt too big, too silent. Still, Jack kept going. He woke before dawn every day, worked his worn hands through the dry soil, and sold what little he could grow at a small wooden roadside stand. It wasn't much, but it was his. He'd lost almost everything. His savings, his health, even the laughter that used to echo from the garden Sarah had planted behind the house. All he had left was the land his grandfather once tilled, a pickup truck that coughed and groaned every morning, and a mortgage payment that loomed over him like a storm cloud. Yet, even with all that weight on his shoulders, Jack had something few others did, a heart that refused to give in. He believed, deep down, that doing the right thing still mattered. That being kind, especially when it's hardest, is never wasted. That belief would soon be tested in the most unexpected way. On that particular day, the sun was relentless, beating down on the road and the fields, and traffic was light. Jack stood behind his stand, tomatoes neatly arranged, cucumbers shining from a light misting. He watched the clock, hoping for customers, silently calculating what he needed to sell to cover the last $200 on his mortgage. Time was running out. Then he saw a man walking slowly along the road. That moment, one brief decision, one quiet act of compassion, would spark a chain of events Jack could never have imagined. And it all started with a stranger and a box of vegetables. Jack Williams wasn't the kind of man who asked for help. He'd been raised on the belief that a person stands on their own 2 feet, no matter how shaky the ground beneath them becomes. But lately, that ground had been more dust than dirt, cracked and dry beneath his boots, just like his spirit. His farm, once a vibrant patchwork of greens and golds, had withered under the weight of 3 unforgiving years of drought. What used to be 30 acres of thriving crops was now reduced to a struggling 10-acre stretch of land, the last piece of his family's legacy. He had already sold off the rest just to keep the bank at bay. But now, even that was slipping through his fingers. He was 5 days away from losing it all. The mortgage deadline was coming fast, and Jack had managed to pull together most of what he owed. But he was still short $200. It might not seem like much to some, but to Jack, it was the wide, uncrossable canyon between holding on and letting go. He had pinned his last hopes on the weekend farmer's market and the little roadside stand he had built with his own hands. Every tomato, every cucumber, every ear of corn had become a calculation, a lifeline. Jack's days were long, and his nights even longer. Each evening, he sat at the same kitchen table where he and Sarah used to laugh over coffee. Now, he sat alone, surrounded by silence and the rustle of unpaid bills. The farmhouse, built by his grandfather, still stood firm against the wind, but inside, the wallpaper was peeling, the floors creaked under tired feet, and the once bright rooms felt dimmer without Sarah's presence. It had been 2 years since cancer took her. 2 years of learning how to cook for one, to talk into emptiness, to carry the weight of grief in quiet ways. The illness had not only taken his wife, but also the savings they had built over a lifetime. Every hospital visit, every prescription, every desperate hope had come at a price. And now, all that remained was a worn photo frame on the mantel, a quiet garden she once tended, and a man trying to honor her memory by not giving up. Despite everything, Jack still showed up every morning. He still wiped down the wooden table at his stand, still arranged his produce with care, still offered a smile to every customer who stopped by, no matter how few there were. The locals admired him, even if they didn't always buy. They said his tomatoes were the best in the county, and Jack took quiet pride in that. He didn't need praise, just enough sales to make it through the month. But this month was different. The farm was tired. The soil didn't yield like it used to. The old truck groaned with every start, and Jack's hands, once strong and sure, had begun to tremble just a little more each day. The weight of everything, his loss, his debt, the drought, pressed down on him like the summer heat. And yet, even in the face of all that, Jack remained the kind of man who gave first and counted the cost later. A man who still believed in doing right, even when the world seemed to have forgotten him. That belief was about to be tested in a way he never expected. It was late afternoon when Jack noticed a figure walking slowly down the side of the dusty road. Not many people passed by his stand on foot, especially not in the sweltering heat of midsummer. The man moved with a limp, his steps uneven, as if each one cost him something. His jeans were faded and dust-covered, his shirt clung to his back with sweat, and atop his head sat a worn military cap, its stitching frayed from time and sun. Jack's eyes settled on the insignia above the brim. Clearly military, clearly earned. The man stopped at the edge of the stand and stared down at the tomatoes without touching them. His eyes moved slowly from one vegetable to the next, the way someone does when they're hungry, but pretending they're not. "Those tomatoes look mighty fine," the man said, his voice quiet but steady. "Fresh picked this morning," Jack replied, stepping forward. "You served?" he asked gently, already knowing the answer. The man gave a small nod. "2 tours in Afghanistan." Jack extended a hand. "Jack Williams." "Michael," the man said, shaking his hand. His grip was firm, but there was a tiredness in his eyes that no rest could fix. Michael picked up a tomato, turned it in his hand, then set it back down. "Just looking today. Try and stretch my disability check till the end of the month." Jack noticed then how thin he looked, how his hands trembled just slightly when he placed the tomato down. Hunger has a way of hiding itself behind pride, but Jack had seen it before. He recognized the signs, and he didn't need to hear anymore. "You look like you could use a good meal," Jack said softly. Michael shrugged. "Been better days. Got laid off last month. Security job. My legs started acting up again." He paused, still waiting on the VA to approve an increase in benefits. Jack's mind raced. He thought of the numbers scribbled on the notepad back in the kitchen, the envelope from the bank sitting on his table, and the silent countdown to losing his land. But there was something in Michael's voice, something quiet and steady and proud, that made those worries fade for just a moment. "Hold on," Jack said, turning toward the back of the stand. He grabbed a cardboard box and began filling it, first with tomatoes, then cucumbers, then green beans, then potatoes. He didn't think, he just moved. Michael took a step back. "I can't afford all that." "It's not for sale," Jack replied, still adding to the box. "It's for you." Michael's expression hardened slightly. "I don't take handouts." Jack stopped and looked him in the eye. "It's not a handout. It's a thank you for your service." For a moment, Michael didn't speak. You could see the pride in him wrestling with the reality of his need. His jaw tightened. His eyes flicked between the box and the ground. "I didn't serve to get free vegetables," he said finally. "I know that," Jack said. "My dad served in Vietnam. He used to say the hardest part wasn't being over there. It was coming home and feeling like no one remembered." Without another word, Jack added 6 ears of sweet corn, his best produce, the ones that always sold first and fast. Every piece he added felt like $1 disappearing from his hope of making that mortgage payment, but he didn't stop. "There's plenty more where this came from," Jack said, even though he knew it wasn't true. Michael hesitated. Then, slowly, he reached for the box. "I don't know what to say," he murmured. "No need to say anything," Jack replied. "Just enjoy it." As Michael turned to leave, Jack called out again. "Wait a sec." He opened his cooler and pulled out 2 dozen eggs, the last ones from his small flock of hens. He walked them over and placed them gently in the box. "Protein," he said. "You'll need it." Michael's eyes glistened. He didn't try to hide it. "Thank you. Truly." Jack watched as the man limped away, holding the box like it was something far more valuable than vegetables. And as the silhouette disappeared down the road, Jack stood there quietly, surrounded by half-empty baskets, with the weight of both worry and peace on his shoulders. He had just given away almost half of his harvest, produce he desperately needed to sell. But something in his heart told him he had done the right thing. And sometimes, that's all a man has to go on. The rest of that Friday crawled by. one quiet hour after another. A few cars passed, slowing just enough to glance at the stand before continuing down the road. By sundown, Jack had sold only a handful of tomatoes and a small bunch of green beans. His total earnings for the day barely scratched $37. He tucked the few bills into his front pocket with a heavy sigh, staring at the nearly full baskets that remained. The corn he had been so proud of sat untouched. The eggs were gone, given freely. And the vegetables? The best of them were now in the hands of a man named Michael, walking who knows where with a box Jack should have sold. As the sun dipped below the horizon, the clouds began to gather, thick and gray, rolling low across the sky like a warning. Jack looked up at them, reading their silence. He'd prayed for rain before, begged for it even. But tonight, of all nights, it felt more like a curse than a blessing. The next morning, the sky opened up. Rain came down hard and steady, soaking the ground, the air, the wood of the stand. Jack rushed outside to pull the baskets under cover, saving what he could. But it didn't matter. No one would be out in this storm. His weekend hopes were washed away, literally. The farmer's market? A lost cause. The passing traffic he relied on? Non-existent. All Jack could do was watch from the porch as the rain danced in puddles where his crops once thrived. By Sunday afternoon, the storm still hadn't let up. Jack sat at his kitchen table, soaked from a failed attempt to patch a leak in the barn roof. The familiar envelope from the bank lay open in front of him, its printed words sharp as nails. He'd already been granted 2 extensions. The third, he knew, wasn't coming. The phone rang. He didn't want to answer, but he did. Mr. Williams, came the polite but firm voice on the other end. "We're calling about your mortgage payment." Jack swallowed hard. "I know. I just need a few more days." "We've been flexible, Mr. Williams," the voice said, colder now. "But if you miss this deadline, we'll have to move forward with proceedings." Jack didn't argue. What was there to say? After he hung up, the silence in the kitchen settled thick around him. He sat there for a long while, hands resting on the table, staring at the faded wallpaper Sarah had chosen. She used to fill this room with music, soft humming while she cooked, the smell of cinnamon and rosemary trailing behind her. Her laugh still echoed in his memory, bright, contagious. Now, the house felt hollow, and the weight of what was slipping away pressed in on all sides. He whispered to the empty room, "You'd know what to do, Sarah." But no answer came, just the rain tapping on the windows like distant footsteps. That night, Jack barely slept. He lay in bed, listening to the wind move through the trees, thinking about everything he'd done, everything he hadn't. The image of Michael's face came back to him, grateful, worn, quiet. Jack remembered the way his hands had trembled, the way he'd tried to refuse the food. Jack had given him that box without knowing if he could spare it. And now, here he was facing the very thing he'd feared most. And yet, he didn't regret it. Not for a second. Because in that moment, when he saw Michael walk away with something to eat, Jack had felt something he hadn't in a long time. Purpose. He may have been broke, beaten down, and one bad day away from losing his farm, but he had done something that mattered. That counted for something. It had to. Monday morning arrived quieter than Jack expected. The storm had finally passed, leaving behind a crisp light that shimmered off the soaked fields. The sky was wide and blue, as if pretending nothing had happened, as if it hadn't just rained away Jack's last chance. He stood on the porch with a cup of weak coffee, his hands wrapped around it more for warmth than comfort. He half expected to see a car pulling up the driveway with a man in a suit, holding a foreclosure notice in an apologetic tone. But that's not what came. Instead, Jack heard the low rumble of engines. Not one, several. The sound grew louder until 3 military vehicles, painted in muted greens and browns, turned down his gravel driveway. Behind them, 2 civilian cars followed. Jack blinked, unsure if he was still dreaming or if the stress had finally gotten to him. He stepped off the porch as the convoy came to a stop in front of the farmhouse. The lead vehicle's door swung open, and out stepped a man in a crisp army dress uniform. Tall, composed, with a sense of purpose in every step. Jack's breath caught when he recognized the face. "Michael," he said, walking forward. The man smiled, standing straighter than he had just a few days earlier. The worn fatigue and limping gait were gone, replaced by pride and clarity. "Morning, Jack," Michael said. "Figured I owed you a proper thank you." Before Jack could respond, the door of one of the civilian cars opened, and a tall man in a navy blue business suit stepped out. He looked like someone who belonged in a boardroom, not on a muddy farm. He offered a firm handshake. "Mr. Williams, I'm David Anderson, CEO of Heartland Agricultural Cooperative." Jack shook his hand automatically, still trying to understand what was happening. I'm sorry, I don't quite." Michael stepped in, his voice calm but firm. "After I left your stand, I told my commanding officer what you did. How you gave me that box of food, even when you couldn't afford to. Turns out my CEO was attending a leadership summit that weekend, and I mentioned your name." Jack raised an eyebrow, confused but listening. "I'm still in the reserves," Michael added. "Didn't say anything the other day. Figured it didn't matter." David nodded and continued. "My brother, Colonel Anderson, was at that meeting. When Michael told the story, he called me immediately." Another door opened. A man with silver hair stepped out of the second civilian car, wearing a military uniform, his medals catching the morning light. "Colonel Richard Anderson," he said, stepping forward to shake Jack's hand. "I don't understand," Jack said quietly. "All this for some vegetables?" "Not for the vegetables," Michael said, his voice steady. "For the man behind them." Jack looked at the three men standing in front of him, an active-duty colonel, a powerful CEO, and a veteran he had only known for 5 minutes. He felt the weight of their presence, but also something else, a shift in the air, a feeling that what he had thought was the end might just be the beginning. And so he invited them inside. Jack led the group into his farmhouse, still dazed by the sight of uniformed soldiers and business executives standing in his front yard. Inside, the kitchen felt smaller than usual, and the worn linoleum floors and peeling wallpaper suddenly seemed more obvious than ever. But if his guests noticed, they said nothing. Instead, they looked around with the quiet respect of people who understood the difference between wealth and worth. David Anderson's assistant brought in a box of pastries and a carafe of fresh coffee, far better than the nearly empty canister Jack had left on his counter. They all gathered around the kitchen table, Michael, David, and Colonel Anderson, filling the chairs Jack had once hoped would be used for family dinners. Jack sat across from them, unsure of what to say. It was the colonel who broke the silence. "Your name rang a bell when my brother told me the story," he said. "Williams, from Missouri. Your father, was he James Williams?" Jack blinked in surprise. "Yes, sir. That's right." The colonel leaned back, a thoughtful expression on his face. "He served in my unit in Vietnam. Kvietman, brave. Always had this dry sense of humor, didn't he?" Jack nodded slowly. "That's him. He ever mentioned a soldier named Richard Anderson?" Jack's eyes widened. "Little Richie?" He let out a breath that was half laugh, half disbelief. "Dad used to talk about you all the time. Said you were the bravest man he ever knew. Colonel Anderson Smilet. Well, your father left that part out where he saved my life. We were ambushed. I was hit, bad, and he carried me 2 miles to the extraction point, with a bullet in his own leg." Jack sat still, stunned. His father had never told him that part of the story. "Typical of your dad," the colonel said, "and it seems typical of his son." Jack looked down at the table, feeling both humbled and overwhelmed. The silence stretched for a moment before Michael leaned forward. "You gave me that box of food when you had every reason not to," he said. "You didn't know who I was. You didn't know if I'd ever come back. You gave away food you couldn't afford to lose. Not many people would do that." David opened the folder he had brought and slid it across the table. "We've been searching for local partners, small family farms that represent the values Heartland was built on," he said. "After hearing about you from my brother, I knew we had to meet." Jack hesitated, glancing at the folder. "We want to offer you a contract to supply produce to our farm-to-table restaurants and organic grocery chains," David explained. "It comes with an advance payment, enough to cover your mortgage immediately." Jack's hands hovered above the folder, but didn't open it. His voice was low, uncertain. "My farm, it's small. The drought hit us hard. My equipment's outdated. I'm not sure I can meet your standards." David nodded. That's why we've built this program the way we have. If you agree to partner with us, we'll provide everything you need: modern irrigation systems, high-quality seeds, technical training, even marketing support. You won't be alone in this. Jack looked up at them, his eyes searching. Why me? Colonel Anderson and David exchanged a glance before the colonel replied, because this isn't just business. It's about doing the right thing, about honoring people who live by values, not just numbers. Michael nodded. You saw someone in need, and you didn't look away. That's what started this. Jack finally opened the folder. His fingers trembled slightly as he read the first page. The terms were clear, fair, and the number written under advance payment made his heart stutter. For a moment, he couldn't speak. He just sat there, holding the contract in both hands like it might vanish if he blinked. When he finally looked up, his voice cracked with emotion. This would save everything. David offered a small smile. We believe in your farm, Jack. But more than that, we believe in you. Jack took a deep breath. His eyes flicked to the old photo of Sarah on the mantle, her smile frozen in time. And then, with steadier hands, he picked up the pen. The change didn't happen overnight, but once it started, it moved with the quiet momentum of something long overdue. Over the next few months, Jack's farm slowly transformed from a place of fading memories into a field of possibility. For the first time in years, the sound of new life returned to the land, not just in the rustle of growing crops, but in laughter, in footsteps, in voices filled with hope. Heartland kept their word. New irrigation systems were installed, snaking through the fields like lifelines. They glistened in the morning light, and Jack often stood watching them work, awed by how efficiently the land responded. The soil, once dry and stubborn, came alive again, nourished, tended, and finally free to flourish. Rows of fresh produce began to sprout in steady abundance. Tomatoes, green beans, sweet corn, lettuces, and more. It was the same land, but now it was as if it had been waiting for this second chance. With the growth came a new kind of demand. Heartland's marketing team designed elegant, earthy packaging branded with the name Williams Family Farm. That name, once nearly lost to a foreclosure notice, now appeared on shelves in grocery stores and specialty markets across the state. Jack's story, his quiet act of kindness, had been told and retold, and people responded. Customers didn't just buy his produce, they supported what it stood for. The roadside stand remained, though now it served a different purpose. Jack rebuilt it, expanded it, added a small awning and a few benches. What had once been a desperate attempt at survival became a community hub, where locals came not only to buy fresh vegetables, but to talk, to linger, to share stories. Teenagers helped carry boxes for elderly neighbors, and old friends reconnected over sun-warmed tomatoes and sweet ears of corn. There were even small chalkboards where kids could write messages or draw pictures. One of them, written in crooked letters, simply read, "Thank you, Mr. Jack." Jack didn't run it all alone anymore. He hired 2 local teens part-time, both from families that had been hit hard by the economy. They showed up early, learned fast, and treated the farm like it meant something, which, under Jack's guidance, it did. And Michael, he didn't disappear either. He joined Heartland's Veteran Employment Initiative, a program designed to give former service members meaningful work in agriculture. Jack watched as Michael helped other veterans navigate the transition into farming, guiding them with patience and empathy. He coordinated job placements, helped with training, and most of all, made sure none of them felt forgotten. The same man who once stood at Jack's stand, hesitant to accept a box of vegetables, now stood in fields across the state helping others plant new roots. Jack's days were full now. Not easy, not without their aches and hard work, but full. He worked with his hands, just as he always had, but now there was music in the air again. The farmhouse, once so silent, echoed with the sounds of life. And every so often, Jack would walk to the edge of the fields at sunset, hands on his hips, looking out over the rows of crops glowing gold in the fading light. He had once thought his kindness might cost him everything, but in truth, it had given him more than he'd ever imagined. 1 year later, the land looked nothing like it had before. What was once dry and fading had become vibrant and full. The fields were thick with color, Deep greens, sun-touched yellows, ripe reds. Crops moved gently in the breeze like waves on a quiet sea. Birds called from fence posts. Bees drifted between blossoms. Life had returned, not just to the soil, but to the spirit of the place. Jack stood at the edge of the field with Michael beside him. Both of them watched as a small group of veterans worked in the rows, checking irrigation lines and harvesting baskets of tomatoes. These were men and women who, like Michael once had, arrived with heavy hearts and unsure futures. Now, they were part of something real, something growing. "I never expected any of this," Jack said, his voice low as he squinted toward the horizon. "I just did what seemed right at the time." Michael smiled, his eyes following a young vet carefully arranging baskets of produce onto a cart. "That's exactly why it happened." They stood there for a long moment, not needing to say more. Later that week, a familiar car rolled into the driveway. A reporter from the local newspaper, the same one who had come on the day of the unexpected convoy. He had returned for a follow-up, curious to see what had become of the quiet act of generosity that once drew headlines. He found Jack under the awning of the roadside stand, surrounded by baskets of vegetables, jars of preserves, and a small chalkboard sign that read Williams Family Farm, grown with gratitude. A small group of children were helping bag fresh green beans for an elderly couple. The reporter smiled and raised his camera. "Mind if I ask a few questions?" Jack wiped his hands on his apron. "Of course not. What's changed the most for you in the past year?" Jack looked around, the teens helping at the stand, the customers laughing near the benches, the veterans working the land he thought he might lose. He didn't hesitate. "It hasn't changed me," he said. "It's just given me more to share." The reporter paused, then nodded slowly. "Beautifully said." After the interview, Jack returned to his evening routine. As the sun dipped low behind the hills, casting the fields in golden light, he walked to the back of the farmhouse. There, just beyond the barn, was a small garden enclosed by a white picket fence. The flowers bloomed in soft, familiar colors: lavender, roses, daisies, all arranged just as Sarah had left them. He had never changed it, not a single plant. Every spring, he tended it the way she used to, down to the careful spacing and the ceramic angel she'd placed by the bird bath. It was her space, her peace, and now it stood as a quiet promise that nothing beautiful is ever truly gone. Jack sat on the bench beside the garden, letting the sounds of the evening settle around him. Crickets chirped, a breeze tugged at the leaves, and he smiled, not because everything was perfect, but because something had come full circle. He had once given away food with nothing left to give. Now, he had more than enough, and every bit of it, he believed, was because he chose kindness over comfort, compassion over calculation. He looked toward the sky, his voice soft. "You'd love this, Sarah? You really would." And somehow, in the quiet glow of that moment, he could almost hear her laugh again, carried on the wind, warm as summer. So what changed everything? Not a business deal, not a bank loan, not luck or timing. It was a simple choice, one quiet act of kindness on an ordinary day. A farmer with nothing to spare offered what little he had to a hungry stranger. Just a box of vegetables, a few ears of corn, 2 dozen eggs. And in that moment, without knowing it, Jack Williams planted something far more powerful than crops. He planted hope. That single gesture rippled outward, reaching beyond the edge of his roadside stand, beyond his 10 acres of struggling land. It reached a veteran who thought he was invisible. It reached a colonel who remembered a debt he could never repay. It reached a company that believed in values over profits, and a community that had nearly forgotten what it felt like to gather around something good. One box of food helped save a farm, but more than that, it built a bridge between strangers, gave purpose to those searching for it, and reminded everyone watching that character still matters. That quiet goodness, though often overlooked, carries the power to change everything. In the end, Jack didn't just regain his land. He helped others find theirs, veterans who needed a new mission, neighbors who needed a new place to belong, and young people who needed someone to believe in them. And while the mortgage was paid, and the crops were thriving, and his name now sat proudly on store shelves across the state, that was never what mattered most to him. Because to Jack, the real reward wasn't success. It was the chance to keep giving. At its heart, this isn't just a tale about a farmer or a veteran. It's a reminder that what we give, even when it seems small or costly, can create a ripple far beyond what we ever imagined. Kindness doesn't always come back the way we expect, but it always comes back. Sometimes, it returns in the form of second chances, restored dreams, or a community brought back together. Jack didn't help for recognition. He gave because it was right. And in doing so, he changed not only his life, but the lives of many others. Thank you for listening. If this story touched your heart, give it a like and subscribe to Mr. Michael Stories for more real, powerful stories that remind us of the good still left in the world. Comment below with one word that describes how this story made you feel. We'd love to hear from you.